Section 24.3. And what we're going to do for the next month, I guess, probably, is I'm going to go over each phylum of organisms.
Are we going to have a test on each one, or is it a test in the one?
No, like this chapter covers sponges and cnidarians, the next chapter covers flatworms, roundworms, rotifers. So we'll have one test on these, and the next test will be on these, and then a test on these, and so forth.
Is this 3 chapters for our next test?
No, the next test is 2, and the one after that will be 3. Okay? So, let's talk about sponges. Sponges are the first type of animal that existed. Sponges have not developed tissues. Sponges are at what we call the cellular level of organization, which means sponges are just a bunch of single cells that have gotten to where they live together with one another.
Develop fungi?
Do what?
What's going on?
Don't mind. I'm doing it's recording.
Okay, my turn. Sponges are a bunch of single cells that live together. They love one another so much that they cannot exist alone for very long. And so if you got a whole bunch of cells that can't live on their own, you have a multicellular creature. That's what you are. You've got a whole bunch of cells and none of them can live by themselves. You see what I'm saying? So that's an animal. So what are the types of cells? There are cells called collar cells. They have flagella that line the inside of the sponge and whip back and forth, throwing water into the body. I'll show you these. Water and waste materials are expelled from the sponge through the osculum. Let's look at a sponge. Here is a sponge. And actually, sponges come in a lot of different shapes and sizes.
And colors?
I have a sponge right here that looks a lot different from this one that's on the board. I'll pass this around in just a second. But sponges come in all different shapes. This is called a tube sponge. And what it has is it has special cells. If you look on the inside of a sponge, lining the inside of its body is a bunch of cells called collar cells. And there they are right there. Each of those little cells. I don't know if you can see it from where you're sitting, but that cell right there has a flagella on it. A little flagella that whips back and forth like this and creates a water current. And water gets pushed out the top. This hole on the top is called the osculum. So water gets pushed out the top and more water comes in to replace that water through little holes. The little holes are called pores. And there they show the holes up close. So the collar cells beat their flagella, push the water up, more water comes through the pores, and as the water comes through the pores, it is strained of any food that it has. There's food just floating around in the water. There's little bacteria and little pieces of plant and little dead organisms and organic matter just floating around in the water, little fats and lipids and things that have died. And that all, as that comes through, there's cells in here that trap it and take it to the other cells. And those cells that trap the food and deliver it to the other cells are called archaeocytes. Archaeocytes are cells that, they're like pizza delivery boys. They deliver the food to each of these cells that's stuck in its place doing its thing. And there's another type of cell called the epithelial cell. It's on the outside that basically makes up the wall of the sponge. They're protective cells that protect the inside of the sponge from damage. And these epithelial cells can lengthen their bodies and cover up the pores if necessary. So the pores can all shut to reduce water flow. If there's some sort of poison or something in the water that they don't want inside. Yes?
Which one's the pizza?
The pizza delivery guy is the archaeocyte. It's a little amoeba-shaped cell,
Yeah.
and it's in between the body, the epithelial cells and the collar cells.
Okay.
And it crawls around and it gets food and it delivers it to every organism. The archaeocytes do another thing. The archaeocytes create spicules. Spicules, I don't know if you can see it here. You may be able to see it better in the picture in your book, which is on page 706.
Oh, I do see it better in the book.
The spicules are shaped like jacks. Y'all played jacks? Y'all remember what that is? You throw a ball up and you scoop up the jacks. This is what they did before video games were invented. They actually played games and like that. And the spicules are there for structure. They give the sponge its structure. Sometimes they're really hard, these spicules, and make the body of the sponge almost like bone. It's real hard, and you have sponges that are very firm and strong. And sometimes they're made of very spongy material that's soft, called spongin. In this material, the spicules are really soft, and so the body of the sponge is soft. This is called a bath sponge, and it's made mostly of spongin material that's real soft. So you can pass this around. This is before they have actual sponges that you buy in the store. They're made of plastic. People would bathe with these. They find a sponge at the bottom of the ocean, they dry it out, all the cells die, and it just leaves the spongin material.
Wash my car.
And then it holds water, and you can wash with it. And it used to be that's what they used before they came up with artificial sponges. I've got another one here that's even softer. I like this one better. We'll pass this around to the other one.
Oh, Melissa.
Bad throw by me. You can't blame Wallace on
Bobby
that.
would have caught that, Morris. Bobby
Would have caught that with his mind.
It's funny because it's
Hey,
better.
Morris is my boy. Get off of it.
Bobby's my
Bobby's a
boy.
better boy.
Sponge video.
Yeah, right.
Bobby's
Water and waste are expelled through the osculum, the large opening at the top of the sponge. Epithelial-like cells are thin and flat cells that contract in response to touch or to irritating chemicals, closing the pores in the sponge. Lining the interior of sponges are collar cells, each of which has a flagellum that whips back and forth, drawing water into the sponge. A pore cell surrounds each pore and allows water carrying food and oxygen into the sponge's body. Located between the two cell layers of a sponge, amoebocytes carry nutrients to other cells, aid in reproduction, and produce chemicals that help make up the spicules of sponges. Spicules are produced by cells derived from amoebocytes and form the hard support systems of sponges.
Okay, a couple confusing things here. The pores are actually made of cells called pore cells. Pore cells.
Really?
I can tell nobody's listening because that was a hilarious
I
joke.
got you.
That was a pretty bad.
Pore cells. You see, pore cells.
It's funny.
So the pore cells make up the little holes. And then they call them amoebocytes here in this video. And your book calls them archaeocytes. Archaeocytes and amoebocytes are the same thing. They're cells that they look like amoebas and they crawl around and distribute food to all the cells. So those are the four types of cells: epithelial cells, pore cells, collar cells, and amoebocytes or archaeocytes. The spicules are not cells. They're made by the amoebocytes and form the structure.
And the
of
pizza
sponge.
ones are the amoebocytes.
The pizza ones are the amoebocytes or archaeocytes. Same. That word is means the same thing. I don't know why they changed the words. I hate when they do that. There's a yellow tube sponge. That has the hard spicules, so that's a hard structure.
You have one of those?
No, I don't have any of those.
Should get one.
I need one.
Sure, follow
I
you.
got one.
It used to be that the bottom of the ocean was covered with sponges because they were the first type of animal. And they did very well, but then when fish evolved, the fish started eating all the sponges. So what happened was the only sponges that survived were ones that were poison, had poison in them, and if the fish ate the sponges, the fish would get sick. So all the sponges that are left nowadays are all poisonous. You can't eat them.
Except for the other two.
Except, well, there are some things that can eat sponges that have developed immunity to the poison, but most things can't.
What if I boil sponge?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if that would help or not.
That would be germs.
Okay, this is a better look at the cells. This is from the AP Biology book, which is it's the same cells. Again, they're the pore cells. They're the collar cells. You see them real well here. See, they have a flagella on the end. And do you see why they call them collar cells? It looks like each of them has a turtleneck collar. There's one really close.
Is that what they call them?
Yeah. Call them collar cells because it looks like each one of them has a collar under a microscope. And there's the pore cell. And there's the epidermal. Here they call it epidermal cell. In your book calls it epithelial cell. But that's the cell on the outside that protects, and it can lengthen and contract and cover up the pore if it has to.
What's that purpose?
The purple thing right there,
Yeah.
that's the amoebocyte. Or archaeocyte is what your book calls it. And that thing's the thing that crawls around and delivers the food.
Video footage?
Lots of video footage of sponges.
Right.
In the survey of the animal kingdom that follows, we will begin with the phylum of sponges. Of all the animal phyla, sponges are considered to be the simplest, primarily because they do not have tissues and so lack nerves and muscles. As a result, sponges follow pretty uncomplicated lives attached to rocks and logs. The scientific name for the sponge phylum is Porifera, which means pore bearers. They were given this name because all sponges are perforated with countless tiny pores, and this is why their dried skeletons absorb water so well. Living sponges continually take water in through their pores and then expel it back outside through a much larger opening. During this process, called filter feeding, special cells inside the sponge's body trap tiny organisms that it uses for food.
Yay.
Good video.
That was exciting, wasn't it?
So,
Here's another exciting sponge video. As if that wasn't enough.
Sponges are the oldest living animals. The earliest sponges appeared well over 500 million years ago, before animal diversity flourished in the Cambrian period. Sponges were clinging to the seafloor long before animals had eyes or reproduced sexually, and before the earliest predators emerged, radically changing the requirements for survival. Many sponges are now toxic to fish that would otherwise prey on them. Some, however, find them a haven.
The fish living inside a sponge.
Awesome.
One more sponge video, two more sponge videos.
Sponges are the simplest true members of the animal kingdom. And like the one-celled animals we have just seen, rely on trapped algae for most of their food. Their spongy bodies are filled with tiny holes through which water containing small particles of food is sucked. Food is trapped in the sponge's body and the water is pumped out of a large hole to the outside. Sponges are made up of many cells of several different types. Most live in salt water. Very often, they just look like bright patches of color, red, yellow, orange, or purple, growing in thin layers on rocky surfaces. Although most household sponges today are made of plastic, it is still possible to buy sponges that are the actual rubbery skeletons of real sponges.
That was lame.
In the bottom of the sea. When I encounter a sponge, I'm just in awe, not only by their presence, by their giant size and their beauty, but they are so different. You know, they're just so different, and you just cannot stop yourself asking questions to this animal. What are you? How did you grow to this size? How do you manage to do every day? What do you do? You know, how do you eat?
Have millions of brittle crystalline spicules embedded in their bodies. Spicules are microscopic structures that help give a sponge its rigidity and form.
Spicules are an incredible tool for us today to identify most of the sponges that are living in the oceans. You can identify a species or a group of sponges not only by the type and the size of the spicules they have, but the way that they are arranged in the sponge body.
For most sponges, the glassy spicules act as a kind of fingerprint. Magnified, their dazzling array of shapes and sizes are as beautiful as they are unearthly.
There's a purple sponge. Pretty. Another sponge. Red sponge. Or orange. Red and orange. And there's a sponge releasing sperm cells into the water.
Jonathan Bird.
Jonathan Bird. Wrong spelling. Sponges create sperm cells with their amoebocytes. Those little amoebocytes, the pizza delivery guys, they will create sperm cells too. They'll multiply by meiosis and release sperm cells into the water that float out of the osculum and float through the water and maybe to another sponge, get sucked in by another sponge, and the next sponge down, the amoebocytes will create eggs. And the sperm will fertilize the egg. And then the fertilized egg, which is called a what? Do you remember?
Zygote.
A zygote is released and floats out in the ocean and lands somewhere and grows into a new sponge. So sponges have sexual reproduction. This is sponge sex you're looking at. If you're ever scuba diving and you see clouds of material coming out of a sponge, that's sponge sperm. Yeah.
How long does it take a sponge to grow?
Good question. I don't know. I don't know. I would guess weeks. A few weeks. 3 weeks. I'm just guessing. I don't know. SpongeBob!
Hey! Video footage?
Video footage!
Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can hear you!
Aye, Captain!
Oh! Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
SpongeBob SquarePants!
As surly and yellow and porous is he.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
If nautical nonsense be something you wish,
SpongeBob SquarePants!
then drop on the deck and float like a fish.
SpongeBob
Ready?
SquarePants!
SpongeBob SquarePants! SpongeBob SquarePants! SpongeBob SquarePants! SpongeBob SquarePants!
time, bro.
One more time?
I thought you
Yeah.
were watching an episode.
You're fine.
Are you ready, kid?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you.
Aye, aye, Captain!
Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
SpongeBob SquarePants!
As sober than yellow and porous is he.
SpongeBob SquarePants!
If nautical nonsense be something you wish,
SpongeBob SquarePants!
then drop on the deck and float like a fish.
SpongeBob
Ready?
SquarePants!
SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob
I watched it, bro.
Yay.
Oh, that's it.
Nautical nonsense be something I wish.
Then drop on the deck and flop on.
You guys don't watch it?
I like the old ones better than the new ones.
Okay.
Here's a new one.
Um,
Oh, yeah, we talked about
I'm
this.
a
That would
big
be never
fan
mind.
of
sponges come in three
We talked about this solid
classes.
type 2
Listen up.
Field trip.
Listen, memorization. It's phylum Porifera. But remember, phylums are broken up into classes. So sponges are basically three classes. Demospongia. In there, the spicules are made of spongin or spongin and silica. So that's the spongin. Those are the soft kinds. Demospongia. Soft.
Wait, where are these listed in the book?
Page
707.
707 is the pictures.
707.
Read a book.
What? I
See
had
the pictures,
707. Me too. So good.
Calcarea, spicules made of calcium carbonate. Now, calcium carbonate is a hard substance. I'll show you some calcium carbonate. This is not a sponge. This is from from the cnidarian. This is the next organism we're going to learn about tomorrow. But it's shell. The same thing shells are made of. Calcium carbonate is really hard, and if you find a seashell, it's made of calcium
Is that what
carbonate.
builds up like in nozzles and stuff sometimes?
In nozzles.
Like, yeah, like
your shower.
Yeah, like your shower.
That's calcium. Yeah. I don't know if it's calcium carbonate. It might be.
I just know it's called
Yeah, it's calcium.
Trade.
Calcium from the water. The water contains a lot of calcium, and when the water dries up, it leaves the calcium on your shower. So anyway, calcarea is the calcium. You can remember that calcium carbonate.
No.
Calcarea,
I'm
calcium.
doing that.
Okay, so those are the hard sponges. And then there are things called glass sponges. Hexactinolita are the glass sponges, and they actually have skeletons made of glass. It's silica is a substance that comes from the ocean, that comes from the sand. Sand is actually made of silica, which is glass. I don't know if you knew that they made glass out of sand. Did you know that? If you heat sand hot enough, it becomes glass. That's where they get glass from. So the organisms have a way, the cells have a way of taking those molecules and making glass in a biological mechanism. It's different from heating it, but it can still make glass. So they have these beautiful glass skeletons. And so those are the hexactinolita. It's because they have these hexagonal shapes in their glass skeletons. That's where the hex comes. A hexagon has 6 sides. So the spicules are made of silica. So those are the 3 classes of sponges. And that's it for sponges. SpongeBob.
One more time. One more time.
SpongeBob Square. No, we're going to finish the video from
Oh,
yesterday.
cut your trip.
So do me a favor, without looking down, without looking at your book, can you name the 4 types of cells in sponges?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you think you can.
Possible.
Without looking. Only one?
Can you give us a
Bennett? 4 cells?
Court.
Bennett.
Pizza delivery.
I was gonna say.
Doubt
Pizza
it.
delivery is not.
Let Bennett do it. Pizza delivery is not their names.
Okay. It's the cell.
Amoebocytes, you could call them, but our book calls it something different. archaeocytes. Okay, that's 2.
You're not in it.
It's like cord,
That's what you get.
net cells,
No.
That's what you get.
course.
Okay, somebody help him. Graham?
Epithelial like
Epithelial-like cells. There's one
Look
more.
at your book.
Oh, collar.
Collar cells. So there's collar cells, pore cells, epithelial cells, and archaeocytes or amoebocytes. 4 types of cells. And what's the big hole at the top called? Osculum.
Spicule.
And the little jack-shaped things? Spicules.
I get you looking.
See, you gotta learn this stuff in class, then later you don't have to study it as much.
Hey, girl, why you be a little more specific?
We're finishing the video from yesterday.
I'm hugging a 5 and that's going to eat. You'd have to cry. You have to cry.
I mean, you're the one being sensitive right now.
Video! Finishing the
I was
video.
like, oh shit.
What about video?
Yes, go ahead.
Life originated from
Bennett, sit
It
down.
could have started elsewhere and fallen to Earth, locked up in a meteorite. In a sky brimming with stars and their planets, who's to say we're alone in the universe? The more we learn of life, the more the boundaries blur. Take cells from inside a creation that consumes energy, respires, controls its temperature, and responds to stimuli. It can seem remarkably alive, yet it's not life at all. There is no living thing that does not eventually die. Life wears out. Yet such is the tenacity of life that if catastrophe struck the Earth, destroying every single thing, if just one molecule of DNA survived such a holocaust, could it be enough to start the whole thing over again?
I told you there would be time to sleep there. That was a good overview of living things. So, listen, tonight you're reading, we don't do all of section 24.3, you just go through page 709, okay? Read through page 709, that's all about sponges, and you could have a quiz over that. Tomorrow we do cnidarians, which are the rest of the section. Willis out.